Is this thing on? Welcome back to Big Mouth and fancy seeing you here in June. A very welcome, my friends, and especially my enemies. Come in, sit down, no touching. I don't do the touching. And welcome to Thursday's edition of the DCEU Daily. What happened to Zack Snyder on Justice League is indicative of Hollywood, because Hollywood really isn't a place for a nice guy, a talented, unique, groundbreaking defender. Who can I compare Zack Snyder to? Oh, I know, Tim Burton. Tim Burton has got this long contract at Disney, and they bring him out now and again. They recently brought him out to do one of their movies, which tanked, right? But this is what Zack Snyder is. That's his comparison. Tim Burton. Tim Burton is this, unique, intelligent, nice guy, wacky. You can tell he's a wacky guy just by looking at him. And not many people appreciate Tim Burton, but the man's a fucking genius, right? And he has his fans. And it's like Zack. Zack is a genius, right? Basically, Zack doesn't look like the same kind of Mad Hatter that Tim Burton does. He looks like an ordinary, everyday, you could call him kind of an attractive man, couldn't you, Zack? But you know what I mean? It's very, very similar. He's not within the Hollywood mainstream. Now, what's very interesting about Zack Snyder as well is that he managed to achieve something that Tim Burton didn't. Tim Burton was going to make a crazy Superman movie that the mainstream audience were going to hate, but I think people like us would have loved. But in the end, Warner Brothers stopped him, right? Now, what's funny about Zack Snyder and ironic, he actually got away with making his Man of Steel movie from being protected from Christopher Nolan. And then he got to make his BVS movie. Now, what's amazing about his BVS movie, not only did he, release a theatrical cut, which wasn't really his complete vision, then thanks to Christopher Nolan and Warner Bros. Wanting to make a little bit more money, he was allowed to release his ultimate 3-hour edition, which was his film, which explains everything, right? The way Warner Bros. Wanted to cut that original theatrical cut was ridiculous. And they were at it again with Justice League because they just didn't understand his vision. Because Zack Snyder is the kind of person who says, fuck the mainstream. I'm here for my people, my kind of people. That's why I'm here. And I don't care about the mainstream audience. He's the kind of guy you don't take to the parties where you want to, wine and dine people and convince you to kind of donate to your kind of election campaign or something like that. Do you know what I mean? But he is the kind of guy a lot of people like because he is a very nice man. And what happened to him on Justice League is what happens to nice people who are involved with bad people. So who are bad people? Well, Hollywood executives. They have no conscience. All they care about is the bottom line because it is their job to care about the bottom line. But as I said on the top of the show, what happened to Zack Snyder, what happened to Justice League is indicative of this modern society, this modern Hollywood, if you like. We saw what happened with Solo, a Star Wars story. From the very moment those two guys tried to do something unique and funny and something out there, they were whacked on the head and said, this isn't Star Wars. But then Ron Howard was allowed to come in and make something that wasn't Star Wars. Because he's Ron Howard. He has power. And no one's going to push him out of a project. That's the difference, right? Did he save that film? No. It flopped. Isn't that funny? Isn't that funny, everyone? That Solo, a Star Wars story, actually flopped. And if they actually allowed those people to make the movie they wanted, they may have got something special and they may have actually had a $1 billion hit. We will never know. But the reality is, the reason Solo failed was because of The Last Jedi. And we're not here to talk about Star Wars. We're here to talk about the DCEU. But the Star Wars franchise and the DCEU have had a very similar beginning. Now, I'm talking about Disney Star Wars, not George Lucas Star Wars, obviously. That's a different kettle of fish, which we're not going to get into right now. But there is a comparison here. You had I mean, obviously, Disney Star Wars started off really well. Both The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi had massive box office. Rogue One had massive box office. So that is really different to the DCEU, because the DCEU has had good box office, but not the kind of start that Star Wars did. But it did. And then The Last Jedi was the film that kind of broke everything. And it really is the same with Batman versus Superman. Batman versus Superman is the film that divided a fan base, that said, right, this is a parameter. We like it and we hate this film, right? Now, The Last Jedi isn't the same kind of film. It isn't made by someone who cares about what they're doing. Zack Snyder was creating a franchise. Rian Johnson was just there to make one movie. And why they chose Rian Johnson, this director in particular, I'll never know. Maybe Rian Johnson and Zack Snyder are not that different, I don't know. But I found Rian Johnson's The Last Jedi a very, very boring, dull, mediocre Star Wars film. In fact, a mediocre film, in whatever kind of terms you judge it as. The thing is with Batman v Superman, it isn't boring. It's fucking compelling. It's amazing. But the mainstream audience didn't like it. The critics didn't like it. I had an argument with a movie comic pundit, or whoever he is, right? Russ. I mean, I started following him because I thought he was kind of a measured guy. But this is what happens. He starts talking about blaming the fans. He starts saying, when people say the movie and comic industry haven't got any new ideas, it just means I don't like what you're doing. Yes, Russ, that's what it means, because you don't have any imagination, or you're not creating anything new, and the audience is getting bored. And at the end of the day, what the Release the Snyder Cut campaign proves is that we're in charge. We're your bitches. And you don't like that. So people like Russ and people like Ben Mendelsohn, who are press secretaries basically for these big studios, try and spin it and blame the consumer. Maybe we're racist. Maybe we're too aggressive. Maybe we're all white men. I don't know. I don't think that's true. I think the Snyder Cut is full of so many different cultures and nationalities and colours and creeds. Quite right too. And I don't think it's about that at all. It's about the consumer having enough of having their pants pulled down by their ankles. And this is what happened with Justice League. We thought we were getting a Zack Snyder film continuing from Batman v Superman. Instead, we got something nobody can even explain, right? What were they going to do afterwards? Let's just say if the Justice League was successful, what was the next move? Well, we kind of know from the post-credit scenes. I mean, obviously, the Flash Superman race was just an interesting race, but it was clear what Jeff Johns and John Berg wanted to do. They wanted to go totally comic book, and I wouldn't have had a problem with that if that's what they were going to do. But we'll never know now, because Justice League wasn't a success. But the big thing, of course, was Deathstroke. We know that Deathstroke and the Injustice League were coming again. That would have been beautiful. That would have been awesome. I mean, they got Jesse Eisenberg there, and considering Jesse Eisenberg wasn't very popular as Lex Luthor with the mainstream audience and the hardcore comic book fans, and everyone wanted Vince D'Onofrio. And in fact, we now know that Eisenberg will never play Lex again. So I think Vince D'Onofrio would be a perfect choice, and I hope we get him, but we shall see. It was amazing that they actually said, we're going to keep Jesse, and they had that great post-credit scene, and it was a great post-credit scene, and I think that Jesse's Lex would have been something that maybe within the writing and what Jeff Johns was attempting to do, that maybe his version could have grew on the audience, but even then, you could have had Vince come in as Lex Luthor Sr., because it wasn't really that well explained what happened to Lex's father. It kind of was inferred he was dead, but they never actually said it. Lex says, maybe if I keep everything the same, maybe he'll come back. Inferring that maybe he's dead and he can't, but also inferring that maybe he just left him and he vanished. So I think that was all I think this is the way the Walter Hamada era will go with Lex, and maybe bring a slightly older Lex to this franchise, and that's really, really exciting too. But it was pretty clear what direction Jeff Johns wanted to go, and we'll never know because Justice League wasn't a success. But for me, I still think if Jeff Johns was in charge of this franchise from day one, he could have done something really special with it. But I feel that Zack Snyder did something really unique and something special. But the movie industry is a business, and if you don't have enough butts in seats, you don't get to keep your job. They're the hard facts. But, Snyder fans, you should fill your heart with this. Tim Burton didn't get to make his Superman movie. But Zack Snyder did. Zack Snyder got to make 2 DC movies. 2 fucking great, unique DC movies his way. So even if we don't see the Justice League version of Snyder's, right? And boy, am I desperate to see that. Boy, I'll be the first one buying the 4K double disc of both cuts. Yeah, apparently there's more than one cut, but of course everyone has more than one cut of their movie, so it's not really breaking news here, and I'm bored of hearing shit like that. Anyway, give us both cuts on the Blu-ray. But just remember that. The man we laud and love for what he gave us got to make 2 DC movies. 2 great DC movies. So whatever happens in the future, they can never take that away from us or him.